Hello, hope you're having a good day. I'm here to talk to you about Every Man Out of His Humour, a 1599 play by Ben Jonson, and specifically to discuss Sogliado and Shakespeare. Sogliado is a character in Every Man Out of His Humour, and Shakespeare is, perhaps you know, a rather famous playwright. And in this play, Sogliado is given a coat of arms, which looks something like this. It's described in great detail in the play, and I'm going to talk about how this is related to Shakespeare. Previously, I have made a video, and it's probably best to watch that first, which you watch here. In this video, I showed how the fairy Bede in the Merry Wives of Windsor was named after the White Thistle. Here's the White Thistle. And in the Merry Wives of Windsor, the fairy Bede is asked to punish discerningly. The name is connected to that discerning punishment because, as Robert Corddry in A Treasury or Storehouse of Similes describes, a thistle, if it be struck upwards, will not lightly molest a man. You'll have no discomfort. But if you stroke it downwards, it will prick him. So Bede's discerning punishing was like the thistle. If you do one thing, you're fine. If you do the other, you will receive pain. You'll be pinched or pricked. And Bede was the name for the white thistle. So there was a metaphor or simile as a joke there by Shakespeare. And now I'm going to develop this because I believe it's crucial to our understanding of Every Man Out of His Humour, where that coat of arms of Sogliado's that I just showed you, in fact, references back to these lines and Bede as a metaphor of the white thistle in Merry Wives of Windsor. So, previously, in that other video, I suggested that the satire in the Merry Wives of Windsor might have gotten Shakespeare into trouble. He'd been very satirical in one version of that play, going so far as to dress up some of the characters as satires, which were linked to satire in the Elizabethan mindset. We got into so much trouble, I suggest, that he could even be mocked for it by his fellow playwright Ben Jonson. In this video, I'm going to show exactly what happened. So, who am I to show you what happened? Well, I've been published in Notes and Queries. This is from December 2024, and my previous video's content covers much of this. I talked about the significance of the names of the fairies in the Merry Wives of Windsor and how those names were connected to the actions that they had to perform. As I just mentioned, Bede is named for the White Thistle and had to punish discerningly. In this video, I'm going to make that relevant to Ben Jonson's Sogliado and to William Shakespeare. First, I'm going to talk about Shakespeare at court, then about Shakespeare's satire, then about Sogliado and Shakespeare in Ben Jonson's Every Man Out of His Humour, and then talk about Shakespeare not at court. Okay, so Shakespeare at court. It was standard practice at the court to have plays performed on at least 4 dates during the winter period. You'd have the 26th or the 27th of December, which was St. Stephen's Day and St. John's Day respectively, the 28th of December, which was Innocents' Day, and also January the 1st, New Year's Day, and January the 6th, which was 12 nights or 12 days after Christmas, so it was 12th night. There may be more times when plays were performed around this period too, but these 4 formed the core. Records are patchy, but these days repeatedly occur for court performances. For example, over 1604-1605 winter period, on the 26th of December, Measure for Measure was performed. On the 28th, Comedy of Errors. On the 1st of January, George Chapman's All Fools. And on the 6th of January, Ben Jonson's The Mask of Blackness. Over the 1597-98 winter period, at least 2 of the plays performed at court were probably Shakespeare's. How can we say that? Well, one of them was Love's Labour's Lost. This was printed in 1598, and on the cover it said, "As it was presented before Her Majesty or Her Highness this last Christmas." And the other of Shakespeare's plays may have been Henry IV, Part 1, because in February 1598, the Earl of Essex wrote to Alexander Ratcliffe to tell Ratcliffe that Ratcliffe's sister was married to Sir John Falstaff. This was a reference to Henry Brooke, aka Lord Cobham, flirting with Ratcliffe's sister. The reference relied on Ratcliffe being familiar with Shakespeare's use of the character Falstaff to mock Brooke. So Henry Brooke was Lord Cobham. Falstaff had another name, Sir John Oldcastle, and the historical Oldcastle had been Lord Cobham, so Shakespeare could mock on stage Sir John Oldcastle, and he was in effect mocking the current Lord Cobham, Henry Brooke. And to be familiar with this, Alexander Ratcliffe needed to have seen the play. Possibly Henry IV, Part 1 was also performed in the 1597-1598 Christmas period, because Essex was making this allusion in February 1598. So Shakespeare could have had 2 of his plays performed at court that period. Quite a successful period for him. So let's look at his satire. Shakespeare had used the historical figure of Sir John Oldcastle to mock the contemporary Lord Cobham, Henry Brooke, as I just explained. This worked because the historical Oldcastle had also been Lord Cobham. Shakespeare gave Oldcastle the alternative name of Falstaff, and in Henry IV, Part 2, even had an epilogue in which he denied any connection between Oldcastle and Falstaff. But critics are pretty much agreed that there is a connection between Falstaff and the mocking of Henry Brooke and that old name of Oldcastle. There are some references in original quartos of these plays of the original name Oldcastle. The denial in the epilogue of Henry IV, Part 2, is a case of methinks the playwright doth protest too much. In my previous video, I argued that in an earlier version of the Merry Wives of Windsor, Falstaff, then called Oldcastle, perhaps also mocking Brooke then, that he had been burnt by 2 of his companions in the forest. These companions had been dressed as satyr, whom Elizabethans connected with the art form of satire, and that this was all some satirical mockery of Henry Brooke, Lord Cobham. But this mockery, this satire, backfired on Shakespeare. That's what I'm suggesting now. And I think in 1599, Ben Jonson was able to mock Shakespeare for the trouble he was getting into. So before we look at that, in 1598, Ben Jonson wrote Every Man in His Humour for Shakespeare's acting company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and Shakespeare had acted in this play. In 1616, this play was published in a big collection of Ben Jonson's works, and we can see Every Man in His Humour, acted in the year 1598 by the Lord Chamberlain, his servants, and Ben Jonson really usefully has a bit of a cast list, or at least gives us the principal comedians who were in this play, including William Shakespeare. But in 1599, Ben Jonson wrote this sequel for this play, Every Man Out of His Humour. You can see this in the 1616 collection. And again, it is for Lord Chamberlain, his servants, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. And without Shakespeare, we get another cast list of sorts. No Shakespeare to be mentioned this time. Nevertheless, many believe that Shakespeare was referenced in Every Man Out of His Humour, as Ben Jonson was poking fun at him. This brings me to Sogliado, the character in Every Man Out of His Humour that many believe Jonson was using to mock Shakespeare. As I said, Jonson's Every Man Out of His Humour didn't feature Shakespeare in its cast, but it did feature the character of Sogliado. Many have thought that this character might have been used to mock Shakespeare. Why? Well, during the play, this foolish character obtains a coat of arms with the motto, "Not without mustard." Compare that with Shakespeare's newly acquired family coat of arms. And his motto, "Non sans droit," down the bottom, "not without right." There's more to the coat of arms than just this, but it wasn't possible to realise it until I'd pointed out Bede in the Merry Wives of Windsor being connected with the White Thistle, and with Shakespeare being so satirical in that version of the Merry Wives of Windsor. The rest is now understandable, thanks to my identification of Bede the fairy from the Merry Wives of Windsor as a simile for the White Thistle. So to understand how this is working, we have to look closely at Sogliado's coat of arms. We need to take some text from Ben Jonson's Every Man Out, which is here, and we can see the character of Sogliado describing his coat of arms. Gyrony of 8 pieces, azure and gules between 3 plates, a chevron engrailed chequy, or ver and ermines, on a chief argent between 2 amulets, sables, a boar's head proper. Now if I park that up there and make sense of that description, we don't tend to have so much to do with this now, so I'm going to explain. First of all, gyrony, these are triangular wedges that come from a central point. In this case, Sogliado tells us there are 8 of them, azure and gules, red and blue. Okay, still might not be able to picture that in your mind's eye. That's what it is. You can see the triangular points coming from a central point in the middle, and they're red and blue triangular wedges. That is gyrony in 8 pieces, azure and gules. Between 3 plates. Plates are usually silver or white. They are circles. We don't get any detail of the positioning here, so I'm guessing with the positioning, but something like that. Then chevron engrailed chequy. A chevron, that's what a chevron is, the pointing up kind of triangle. Engrailed means that the chevron is not made up of parallel lines. Instead, they're going to be curved inwards in little hoops. There was another Latin phrase if they were curled outwards. So they weren't curled outwards. Engrailed means they were curved inwards to look like this. Chequy means using alternating colours, hence checked. Little squares of alternating colours. So a chevron engrailed chequy, or ver and ermine, must have looked something like this. Or ver and ermine, gold, green and white, possibly with black for the ermine. That's what has been described by Sogliado on his coat of arms. I think it's very reminiscent of a thistle, something spiky, the arm of a plant. The colours help with that too. So there we go on the coat of arms. And a chief argent means a band at the top, which is silver. And annulet sable means black rings. Look something like this with a boar's head proper in the middle. And we're also told that the rest of the boar is in the middle there, a decapitated boar resting rampant. So there we have it, complete with, we are told, the motto for the family coat of arms, "Not without mustard." So that is what Sogliado describes as his coat of arms. And I think the thistle there, or the thistle-like chevron, is in fact a reference to the thistle Bede from the Merry Wives of Windsor, which had got Shakespeare into trouble. So this is all mocking Shakespeare, including his family coat of arms motto, "Non sans droit." But we were never able to realise the thistle part until my work about Bede in Merry Wives of Windsor. So, looking at a little bit more from Every Man Out of his humour, Sogliado says, "Yes, and on my coat of arms I've got a boar without a head, rampant," in standing like that, rampant. Other characters realise this is something funny, and they say, "A swine without a head without brain, without wit, or without anything indeed, and ramping to gentility. You can blazon the rest, you can understand the rest, okay? I think this is mocking Shakespeare. He'd been mocking, satirising Lord Cobham, gentility. So this swine without a head, stupidly mocking the rich and powerful and influential. This is Shakespeare ramping to gentility. The boar's head is up there. Perhaps the boar's head is a reference to the Boar's Head Tavern from the Henry IV plays. So something more about Shakespeare's play. And get here. Somebody begins to interpret this. Carlo Buffone says, oh my gosh, a boar's head between two sables. Between two amulets, sable. So he describes this, or he interprets this for us, as well as the pun on the Boar's Head Tavern. There could be another, he says, oh my gosh, it's like the meal at an inn. It's hog's cheek and puddings on plates. That's what he sees at the top here, a meal at an inn. Hog's cheek and 2 puddings on plates. I think following from that, we could then be tempted to interpret what's on the shield as 3 plates, maybe 3 noble people about to carve up the corpse of that swine who was ramping to gentility. Perhaps they seem to have victory over Shakespeare. He's being served up on that thistle, the very thistle that he had been using to mock people in Merry Wives of Windsor, and all over a reference to his own family coat of arms, not without mustard. Even perhaps the red and the blue colours here are used to mock Shakespeare. We see the royal flag here, the royal standard, with similar colours. Just imagine if there were lines going on diagonals here too, and we continue the alternating red-blue colour, we would come to the colour that's described on Sogliado's shield as the pattern of triangular wedges, red and blue. You can see from Henry IV's, I think it's coronation here, you can see that colour scheme. There's sort of royal connections, perhaps mocking Shakespeare and his pretensions maybe for thinking he was better than he was. Which brings me to Shakespeare not at court. So I'm arguing, or I have argued, that in 1599, in Every Man Out of His Humour, Ben Jonson knew that Shakespeare had gotten into trouble with Merry Wives of Windsor, that original version, and in particular with his satire there, perhaps about Lord Cobham, Henry Brooke, and these instructions at the end with Bede, which was a White Thistle. And so Ben Jonson had mocked Shakespeare with Sogliado. Already people knew Sogliado's family motto mirrored Shakespeare's coat of arms family motto. People didn't know until now. Bede the White Thistle was referenced as the chevron, the thistle resembling part of Sogliado's coat of arms. There we go, another reference to Shakespeare's work. How does this tie in with Shakespeare not at court? Well, I said in 1598 he seems to have had a successful year. Love's Labour's Lost, and perhaps Henry IV Part 1 being performed in that winter 1597-1598 period at court. And now Ben Jonson had written Every Man Out of His Humour in 1599, and it doesn't include Shakespeare in the cast list. Nevertheless, it was one of the Lord Chamberlain's men's offerings at court for the 1599 to 1600 Christmas period. Shakespeare not needed at court then for that performance. In that 1616 collection of Ben Jonson's works, when he's presenting Every Man Out of His Humour, he says, and there was a presentation before Queen Elizabeth, and it's highly likely that it was over the Christmas period, because John Hemmings, court records show that John Hemmings was paid for 3 performances at court, 2 in the winter period and 1 in February. And if we take those 4 traditional dates for performances at court, we also know that 2 of the other dates were taken up by performances by another company, the Lord Admiral's Men. Both of those plays were written by Thomas Dekker. We know this because both of those were printed in 1600 and their royal performances were referenced on the covers. So, The Pleasant Comedy of Old Fortunatus, it had been played before the Queen's Majesty this Christmas, and The Shoemaker's Holiday, also known as The Gentlecraft, that had been acted before the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty on New Year's Day. So, if we have a look at the dates for the royal performances, 26th of December, the Lord Chamberlain's Men were paid for a performance. 27th of December, Lord Admiral's Men, it must have been Old Fortunatus, because New Year's Day, you said the cover of Shoemaker's Holiday says performed on New Year's Day, so the other Lord Admiral's Men performance, Old Fortunatus, must have been the 27th of December. 6th of January was the other time the Lord Chamberlain's Men were paid for a performance, and Ben Jonson's Every Man Out of His Humour got a royal performance, so that must have taken up one of those dates. We do not know what the other Lord Chamberlain's Men's performance was, but the 3 that we know about don't require Shakespeare at all. Not there for the Lord Admiral's Men's performances, and he's not even required as an actor for the performance of Ben Jonson's Every Man Out, even though he's being mocked on stage, so the Queen could have had a good laugh at references to Shakespeare. No requirement for Shakespeare to be present. And we don't know what that last one is, but I suspect Shakespeare was also not involved there. We have no evidence of a Shakespeare play. Shakespeare not even needed as an actor, but he was being mocked on stage. I think his satire from Merry Wives of Windsor had gotten him into enough trouble that he was kept from court in the 1599-1600 winter period. Kept from court, but that didn't keep Ben Jonson from mocking him at court. Now we have a little bit of an insight into a biographical snippet of Shakespeare's life that we didn't have before, and an understanding of Ben Jonson's Every Man Out of His Humour, and we can see a little more how Sogliado was a reference and a mockery of Shakespeare. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day. Goodbye.